Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a bizarre weather pattern that'll be impacting the United States this week, bringing the potential for record-breaking temperatures, along with the threat for severe weather that could bring damaging winds, large hail, and possibly a few tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. Well, first begin with the Central Plains. That is actually where a very small scale surface low is currently ongoing. And though this is a small scale low pressure system, it'll actually bring the threat for some severe weather to the Central and Southern Plains over the next 72 hours, primarily to areas like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, but we might see some sporadic severe weather just outside of that. Meanwhile, across the rest of the country, there is really no organized systems ongoing. And this is pretty shocking for this time of the year, because typically in May, we are watching negatively tilted troughs, or at least some sort of organized low pressure systems coming out of the west coast, moving inland, going towards the Great Plains. We've really not seen any of that for the past couple of weeks, and that pattern is likely going to continue for the next week or so until we have a short wave trough impact the United States sometime going into this upcoming weekend. But first off, for this week, we have another omega block pattern. We had this a couple weeks ago in the United States. This is essentially where we have a high pressure system dominating across a large chunk of the country. Meanwhile, our jet stream is kind of off to the northwest and northeast of that high pressure system, so we have a low pressure system back over into the northwest United States, very weak by the way, and then we have another low pressure system back over here closer to areas in southeast Canada. Again, another very weak low pressure system. So what we have right now is this very dominant high pressure system that is going to limit overall the severe weather potential this week, and really a lot of the shower and storm activity that some parts of the country desperately need because of the drought that we have ongoing in some areas. And this will overall increase the high temperatures, and we'll actually have the threat of some record-breaking highs back up into the Midwest and the Northeast. So you'll notice going into Thursday into Friday, this pattern does not change really whatsoever. We still have a dominant ridge in the central United States. Meanwhile, we'll be watching a low pressure system that could pose a threat for more significant severe weather as we go into this upcoming weekend. I'll talk about more on this later in this forecast. And then once we go into the weekend and into early next week, we'll be watching for a couple of different areas, one of which will have a very weak low pressure system in the southeast United States, and then possibly another one back over into the western half of the United States, both of which will be something to watch for. But meanwhile, even into next weekend, we are still watching a pretty dominant ridge, at least as we get close to the end of May. And something that's really fascinating is how the dew points are correlated with the current weather pattern. You'll notice going through this week, most of the moisture in the United States is down along the Gulf Coast and maybe a little bit inland towards areas like Oklahoma back through the southern Ohio Valley. And there is a bit of a reach as we go off to the north. There's actually some humidity that goes as far north as areas like the Dakotas into southern Canada. And as we go into later this week, that moisture will continue to pull very gradually off to the north. You'll notice dew points anywhere in this blue is going to represent dew points in the 60s. That'll start to rise a little bit further off to the north as we get closer to the later week. So going into Thursday and Friday, that's when those dew points start to drift a bit further off to the north. And then you'll notice back over in the Midwest, a high pressure system will start to move into that area, meaning that the moisture is going to go down quite substantially. Once we get into next weekend, that is when that threat for a short wave trough could impact the United States. And again, that might bring some more significant severe weather, but again, a lot of uncertainty even past Wednesday or Thursday of this week still does exist because of this omega block pattern. But for the future radar, we'll be watching over the Central Plains and as well as the Southern Plains for some isolated severe weather over the next couple of days. And as we go into midweek, really this trend will continue. We'll be watching for some isolated to scattered storms in the Southern Plains. Check out this massive high pressure system in Canada. This is really going to be a big part of the weather in the United States for the next 5 to 7 days. I already mentioned that omega block pattern, but this will essentially at the surface keep areas in the Midwest much drier. In addition to that, this will create the potential for record-breaking high temperatures. So something to really watch for across the Midwest and as well as into the Northeast. And as we get closer to the weekend, shower and storm activity does pick up a bit more across the Great Plains. So we'll watch for that threat of maybe that shortwave trough to bring some severe weather. There's still some uncertainty there, but look back over on the East Coast. There's actually a chance, it's right now a 10% probability. I'll talk about more on this in a moment, but there's a chance for a tropical depression or storm to develop along the East Coast going closer to the weekend. I know, it's crazy. We're not even in hurricane season yet, but there is that chance. I'll talk about more on that here in a moment. But let's first discuss that severe weather potential. We'll begin with today. There is currently a slight risk of severe weather across areas in the Texas Panhandle and as well as in extreme western Oklahoma. This will be mainly for the threat of damaging winds with some large hail with those initial cells. There might be an isolated tornado in areas in the Panhandle, but overall the threat is pretty low, and we're not looking at any huge, strong tornadic activity today. For tomorrow, the threat stays fairly similar. It does shift slightly to the east. Overall, there's another slight risk of severe weather for those back into north central Texas and as well as into the Texas Panhandle. Main concern again tomorrow will be the same stuff, damaging winds and large hail with maybe an isolated tornado. And then there's a marginal threat as we go into Wednesday. This is primarily again for damaging winds and large hail with maybe an isolated tornado. Now overall, the threats will stay very consistent over the next several days, but keep a close eye to Tuesday. We might see that threat area expand a bit more closer to DFW, and I'll show you why here on the HRR model. This is the future radar for today. We'll be watching for some showers and storms this afternoon to develop across areas like western Oklahoma and as well as the Texas Panhandle. Most of these will be producing damaging winds, but those initial cells might produce some large to even maybe some very large hail. And then once we go into the overnight hours, this is around 1 o'clock in the morning, these showers and storms are going to be very weak, and most of these will not be producing severe weather. There could still be some gusty winds though, as those do approach areas like North Texas and as well as through central Oklahoma. Tomorrow we'll start out with some showers and storms across central Oklahoma. Those will not be severe, and if there are any storms, it's going to be very weak overall. Mostly just some showers out there, but once we go into the afternoon, more storms form over in the Texas Panhandle. These might be a bit more severe than what we see today, with maybe a slightly higher damaging wind potential. And then once we go into the evening hours, that cluster pushes quickly towards North Texas, and this might still be producing some severe weather even as it approaches DFW around 12 to 1 o'clock going into late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. So keep that in mind. We might see some more severe weather there, but overall the threat of severe weather will remain very low and mostly just damaging winds if anything. Now for the rain over the next 7 days, this is quite crazy. This is the next 3 days. You'll notice there's a big hole in the Midwest for rainfall accumulation. This is the Weather Prediction Center's forecast. Not really any rain across those areas, and notice by day 7, this is going into this upcoming weekend and even into early next week. Still, Midwest really not going to see any rainfall over the next 7 days. So if you have any outdoor plans, weather looks pretty nice for it, but keep in mind it's going to be very hot out there for this time of the year. Highs could get into the 80s in some areas. Wouldn't even rule out an isolated area getting closer to 90. Now changing gears to the tropics, something we usually do not talk about in May, but there is actually a small area east of Florida that has a 10% chance of developing over the next 5 days. This could potentially become a tropical depression or maybe a small tropical storm. This will be moving off to the northwest. It will likely impact the East Coast regardless, but it might become a weak tropical storm sometime later this week, which is quite crazy. Again, we're in May. We are still a couple weeks out from hurricane season, but overall, this system will just bring a lot of rainfall. That's the biggest thing with it. It will not bring flooding rains, most likely. If anything, just isolated flash flooding. But you'll notice going into Thursday into Friday, the system becomes a little bit more organized just off the coast of the Carolinas. Really, the pressure, though, that the European model is indicating is not very impressive. 1,007 millibars is really not much of anything, but it could become something small, so we'll keep a close eye on it. For those along the East Coast, really no high winds are expected out of this. The highest wind gusts that are being estimated by the European model are around 40 miles per hour. So overall, there should not be any huge concern for this storm at this time, but keep a close eye on it if you're along the East Coast. And thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe down below.